Many years ago, 3 small railways, the Sodor and Mainland Railway, the Tidmouth, Knapford and Aylesbridge Railway, and the Wellsworth and Sudbury Railway merged into one railway, the North Western Railway. It was run by the Fat Controller's grandfather, Sir Charles Topham Hatt, otherwise known as the Fat Director. This change came with some considerable expansion of the line, and to help build and run it, new engines were brought in, such as Thomas, Edward, Henry and Gordon. Thomas and Edward were 2 of the first engines to arrive and helped with the construction work. After this was finished, Thomas became a station pilot, shunting trucks and coaches for the other engines, until he would rescue James and earn his own branch line. Edward was used less and less, until the day he got taken out for a passenger run, and did so well that his driver promised to take him out again the next day. The line had 3 other engines. One of them was called Eagle. He was red, the same colour that James would eventually become. He was a helpful sort of engine and was willing to come to the aid of those in need. The other 2 were blue engines. They had no names, only numbers. 98462 and 87546. These 2 engines were callous, rude and disrespectful towards the other engines. They prided themselves greatly, considering themselves above everyone else, and were not afraid of saying so, to the point where even Gordon, for all his arrogance, grew hurt and impatient with them. One day, Thomas was shunting coaches for Eagle's stopping service into the platform at the big station at Vickerstown. He stopped, and his driver uncoupled him, ready for him to shunt the express into the station for 98462. Gordon was away for some minor repairs, following an accident with a car at a level crossing. The damage to him wasn't too bad, but one of his buffers had been dented. Anyway, 98462 reversed crossly into the station, disobeying a signal set at danger, which was set to warn engines that Thomas was on the line. "Hurry up, little puffball," he snapped at Thomas. "You're blocking my line." Thomas seethed crossly. "It's you who's on the wrong part of the line, you bully. You just passed the signal at danger. You might have derailed yourself on the points," he snapped crossly. "Ha! As if I'd derail myself on points, I'm so big," laughed 98462 rudely. "You're smaller than a spider compared to me, little Thomas, and dare I say about as good looking as a pig. So I think I can have better luck on a pair of stupid points." Thankfully, 98462 had not fouled the points, so Thomas was still able to move over to the other line. It was most unfortunate, however, that neither engine had noticed a group of young men throwing rocks at one of the points Thomas was due to cross over, jamming them, and that the signalman had almost forgotten about Thomas until he saw the 2 engines on the same tracks. As soon as he set the points straight in front of Thomas, Thomas started to move. He then quickly moved over to change the other points, so Thomas could move onto the other line, run around the coaches and get behind them to push 98462's train to help it start. As soon as he realised those points were jammed, he rushed out and tried to warn Thomas, but his cries were unheeded. Thomas was in such a foul mood that he didn't notice, and anyway, he was moving much too fast to stop in time. As soon as he crossed over the points, the front 2 wheels on his left climbed up and over the rails and crunched the ballast, while the other front 2 wheels on his left rested on the sleepers. "Bust my buffers!" he exclaimed. 98462 laughed rudely. "See what I mean?" he chuckled. "I would never have any trouble with points, I'm so big." "Well, your driving wheels might not, but your wheels in front might," snapped an embarrassed Thomas in anger. Soon, Eagle brought the breakdown train with the Fat Director on board. First, he helped 98462's train to start, then he returned to help clear the mess and take Thomas to the works. The Fat Director spoke kindly to Thomas. "The accident wasn't your fault, Thomas. Those hooligans should have known better than to throw rocks onto the line. However, I'm afraid you'll have to go to the works for a few repairs. Eagle will take over your work, and Edward will, I'm sure, be willing to help with Eagle's trains." "Thank you, sir," Thomas said sadly. Thomas was loaded onto a flatbed and Eagle took him to the works. "Cheer up, Thomas," encouraged Eagle. "The accident could have been worse after all." Thomas sighed. "It's not that, Eagle. It's 98462. He called me a little puffball and said he could never derail himself on points." "Pah!" retorted Eagle. "Take no notice of him. You know what he and 87546 are like. Besides, with an attitude like that, his words would probably come back and bite him in the coal bunker one day." Eagle was righter than he thought. Over the next few days, while Thomas was being mended, Eagle would shunt the express for 98462, noticing and even trying to tell him that he was moving into the station with the signal and points set against him. But 98462 just laughed rudely. However, this would soon come to an end. On the day Thomas was due to return, 98462 was pulling an express train from Barrow-in-Furness to the big station. "Come on, come on, come on," he demanded to the coaches. "All right, we're coming, all right, we're coming," grumbled the coaches. "Ha! Look at me now, look at me now," sang 98462. "Boop, boop, 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 boop. I'd like to see some stupid points stop me now." But he'd reckoned without Jack. Jack was a new signalman, and today was his first day on the job. He hadn't met all the engines before. The engine he heard in the distance was, he thought, 87546 on a stopping train. So he tried to set the points in the station ready for the train to run round, successfully changing one of them so that 98462 would be diverted towards the second platform. But 98462 had been moving much too fast. He crossed over one set of points, derailed on the other, continued to move at a dangerous speed and climbed up and over onto the platform. The guard had saved the coaches. He had happened to lean out of his window before 98462 crossed the points and saw that the points ahead of them were against the train. Knowing what would happen, he slammed on his brakes, significantly slowing down so that 98462 would come off the rails. 98462 looked ridiculous. The whole of his body was mounted on the platform and half of his tender hung dangerously over the edge, while the other half was nestled in the track. Angry staff and passengers helped each other off the ground and out of the coaches and swarmed around 98462, embarrassing him and saying what a bad railway it was. Worst of all, he saw Thomas, who had just returned that morning and had seen everything. Thomas was laughing so hard it looked as though his boiler would burst. The fat director came out of his office to see what had happened. One look at the awkward disaster told him everything. He glowered meaningfully at Thomas, who stopped laughing and started to pull the coaches away. Then he spoke severely to Jack and 98462. Jack immediately apologised and promised to help clear up the mess. 98462, on the other hand, insisted it was not his fault. "I'm aware of that, 98462, but Thomas has told me about what you said to him. You deserve this accident from all the trouble you caused us. Maybe next time you'll be more careful on what you say about points and passing signals are danger too. And you can forget ever pulling the express again, I can assure you that much." He turned on his heels and walked sternly away, leaving 98462 to gnash his teeth in rage. Just at the bottom of Gordon's Hill on the inside line, the curve is significantly tighter than all the others. This was mainly so there would be enough space for the engines to successfully navigate the curve without hitting anything on either side of the line or coming off the rails if the train is going slow enough. If the train went too fast, it would tilt too much and come off the rails, whether the engine was pulling trucks or not. Most of the engines were careful when running over this particular piece of track. They knew it was for their own good. 87546, however, had other ideas. "You're all just scared," he scoffed. "You should try a bit of record breaking. Be a bit more daring like me." Edward rolled his eyes. He was one of the few engines who stood up to 98462 and 87546. You, with all your speeding 87546, should at least know better than to go tearing round tight corners, he argued. Pah! Retorted 87546. That corner's safe enough for engines to go at over 136 miles an hour. I am being incredibly foolish, snapped Edward. Agreed, said Gordon. Express engines may be fastest and best, 87546, but on a railway, safety and being on time both share top priority. 87546 just snorted in disgust. The railway was having a hard time keeping up with its demands. 2 of its engines were currently out of service. 98462 was being repaired following his accident, and Henry was still bricked up in his tunnel. This meant that more new engines were needed. The Fat Director had just brought in a second red engine while 98462 was in the works, and following Henry's spell in the tunnel, was in the process of arranging the purchase of a black LNYR Class 28 experimental engine who would later turn out to be James before he was painted red. The demand for extra trains meant that the engines had to work harder than ever. To add insult to injury, Gordon was sent to the works to have his safety valve mended. Henry, who had been let out of the tunnel, had helped Edward take over the express that day, but he suffered greatly from his illnesses, meaning that he couldn't take it out that often. So, the Fat Director grudgingly gave responsibility of the express over to 87546, who revelled in the opportunity. In the few days Gordon was being mended, he boasted about his responsibility to the others to such an extent that the Fat Director was beginning to wonder whether another engine should take the express instead. Then came the day that confirmed his thoughts. 87546 waited crossly at Barrow in Furness for the connection to the mainland. 5 minutes, he muttered angrily. Just then, another engine pulling a passenger train pulled in out of breath. Immediately, the passengers burst out, among them the Vicar of Wellsworth and his family, coming back from their holiday. The vicar was heading to Teignmouth to help his sister, brother-in-law and baby niece take their luggage home, and stay the night with them. I'm sorry, staff trouble, the engine panted. Had trouble finding the guard. Stop it nonsense, snapped 87546. You're just too slow. All of you engines are. You're all unfit for service. Why can't you just go and roll yourselves on the scrap heap? The other engine gasped in shock. When 87546 had gone, Eagle, who had just delivered a goods train and heard everything, pulled up alongside the engine, who had stopped by the water tower for a rest. Don't worry about him, he's always like that, Eagle explained. He'll get what's coming to him, you mark my words. I hope so, he deserves it, replied the other engine crossly. He said we should just get ourselves scrapped if we can't go as fast as him. Well, by the way he's going, I wouldn't be too surprised if he got scrapped first with an attitude like that, Eagle added. Things got worse for 87546 as the journey went on. At the next station, a signal had failed, and since he was the first train to arrive there, he inevitably had to wait while it was mended. 87546 seethed impatiently at this. We should just go on through, we're late enough already, he moaned to his crew. No one can say we disagree with you, said his driver, who personally wanted to finish the journey, if only to get home and away from his disrespectful engine. But it's orders. Pah! You're just a goody two-shoes, too afraid to take a few tiny risks, said 87546. We'd be able to puff safely through the whole line if you weren't such a coward. I'd rather be a coward than a reckless piece of scrap, the driver muttered to the fireman, who solemnly agreed with him. Half an hour later, amidst the complaints of the passengers, not helped by 87546 insults, the workmen had fixed the signal. By then, some of the passengers had decided they had had enough and had left the express. Some exchanged their tickets and caught another passenger train on the other line, which was hauled by Edward. Others refunded their tickets and either caught the bus or walked home. This made 87546 crosser and crosser. When the guard blew his whistle, 87546 started almost immediately jerking the couplings on his coaches. Ow, ow, ow! They screamed. We don't like that, we don't like that, we don't like that. Every wise engine knows never to bump coaches, or else they will pay them out. Shut up and get moving, snapped 87546, utterly incensed with rage. We're late enough as it is. I don't think I like where this is going, groaned the driver. Why is that? Asked the fireman. Because of a story I heard about an engine who wouldn't stop no matter what, the driver replied. I used to work on the Sodor railway, and I heard a story about an engine called Albert. He was a horrible engine and thought he knew better than anyone, including the manager. He tried to rush his work and ended up running dry, using up all his water. He got scrapped as a result, and well, by the way 87546 is going, I wouldn't be surprised if something bad did happen. The driver was right. They were climbing up Gordon's Hill when 87546 started to pick up speed. Since his train was now half empty, he didn't need a banker as much. He was also a strong engine, built as an experimental prototype to pull heavier loads than engines like 98462. The driver, expecting the worst, fought for control. What made matters worse was that they were on the down line, the same line as the sharp corner on the other side. When 87546 saw the curve ahead of him, he realised his mistake and tried to stop, but the force of the coaches only made him go faster. They decided to pay him out, and they were pushing him down the hill. The driver fought to reduce speed, but they were still going much too fast. Acting quickly, he and the fireman jumped clear and the guard slammed on his brakes, while 87546 just shut his eyes. The front half of the train tilted to one side, hitting the ground with a sickening thud. The second stopped with such a jolt that the coach, who was now at the front, suddenly found itself resting in between the sleepers and the ballast, with a rail running right underneath her. Edward, who was the banker at the time, rolled up alongside the wreckage. It was worse than he thought. 87546 was blocking two lines. He and the front half of his train lay on their side on one track, right in front of Edward, while the other half of his train had stayed upright on the other line. A crowd of passengers had gathered around the train. Some of them were groaning. Their faces suggested they had been hurt. Then Edward saw one of the passengers being carried on a stretcher. He heard Gordon's whistle in the distance, and the big engine puffed up the hill behind him. He replied with 3 blasts. "Stop, Gordon!" he called. Fortunately, the signalman had been told of the accident. He set all the signals in the area to danger and told Gordon to proceed with caution and be prepared to stop when needed. Gordon had needed to stop anyway for a banker. He opened his mouth to demand why such an important engine needed to stop. Then he saw the passengers and promptly shut it. "Get the injured passengers to the last station, fast as you can, Edward," came a familiar voice, who then told 87546's guards to phone an ambulance and meet the train at Wellsworth. Edward, knowing who the voice belonged to, quickly ran to the bottom of the hill, while Gordon and his crew, acting instinctively, uncoupled themselves from the coaches and raced away to fetch the breakdown train. "This is why I never liked those big engines," snapped the fat director. "I would have hoped you'd know better than to do something as stupid as this, 87546. An engine of your size should never go that ridiculously fast. Even Gordon knows that. Because of you, 16 passengers were injured, one, the Vicar of Wellsworth, seriously." "It wasn't my fault, sir. My driver made me go faster," replied 87546. "No, I didn't, you liar! You wanted to go faster just because we were delayed by a broken signal," corrected the driver. "So, not only have you put your passengers in danger, but you have also just lied to me," yells the fat director. "I have had it with you, 87546. When you're mended, you can stay in your shed until I decide what to do with you." So he left 87546 in the shed for a very long time. 87546 resented him for this, and made whatever job he had when he was taken out to take over from us difficult. He and 98462 paid the price for their foolishness eventually, though. 98462 and 87546 never sought repentance following their accidents. They thought they were in the right and constantly criticised the Fat Director and the other engines for this. One evening, the two engines were alone in the sheds at Vickerstown. "I should be pulling high-speed expresses, not slow goods. I'm clearly too good an engine for this park railway," said 98462. "That makes two of us," agreed 87546. "I should be in use, not standing in the shed collecting dust like that relic Edward should be doing." Then, an idea flew into 98462's funnel. "You're confined to the shed, you say? Listen, I've got an idea to get you out. We'll show that fat idiot what we can do." The next day, when the shed foreman came, 98462 told him that 87546 was to be let out. "It's director's orders," lied 98462. "He came by this morning in a hurry and told me to let you know." The foreman, suspecting nothing, sent one of the workmen round to 87546's crew's houses to let them know. It was only when both engines had left for work that he had started to feel that something was wrong. Surely the Fat Director would let him know immediately if an engine was to be let out of the shed, instead of asking an engine like 98462 to tell him. However, he had just heard that Henry had broken down again, so he decided not to think about it anymore. He might have stopped the accident if he had. Edward was shunting in the yard outside Vickerstown that day when the signalman ran up. He pointed to two coaches standing outside his signal box. "Can you move these coaches to the other loop, please?" he asked. "There's an empty train of coal trucks due to come in to make way for a local passenger train, and they're both on the same line." "Right away," said Edward as he reversed onto the other line and coupled up to the coaches. They both had names on their side which read Annie on the coach facing him and Clarabelle on the coach behind her. "Where are we going? Where are we going?" twittered the coaches. "Just onto the other siding. We have to make way for two other trains to come through," Edward replied. "Oh, such a shame," replied Annie. "We never go anywhere these days," added Clarabelle. "Well, maybe one day you might get lucky," laughed Edward. At Vickerstown, Thomas had just finished shunting a local train for 87546. It had originally been for Henry, but he had just been told of the last-minute change in engines. Unfortunately, the only coaches available were old ones, which were gas-lit. It was still early in the morning, and the passengers had just started to arrive. They weren't too keen on having to travel in old coaches, who were clearly due for an overhaul, but were in a hurry for either work or school, and so boarded the train regardless. Thomas had had his doubts about the train he had just assembled, but there were no coaches left in the yard until Gordon came in with his express from Barrow-in-Furness, and Edwards was due to fetch some new coaches from Crovan's Gate. Just then, 87546 backed down onto his train. "Pooh!" he exclaimed. "Smelly old coaches. I'd rather have new ones any day." He was soon followed by 98462. "Saw you needed a bit of help," he said. "We real engines must stick together." Thomas was confused. "Aren't you supposed to be in your shed, 87546? And last I heard, you were banned from pulling trains. And shouldn't you be taking your express goods now, 98462? Shortage of engines, and it's too heavy for one," 87546 said quickly, hoping the Fat Director hadn't heard them. This was partly true, given Henry's breakdown, but Thomas didn't realise 87546 was lying to him. The guard blew his whistle and waved his green flag. "Come on, come on, come on," barked the two engines. The coaches groaned and creaked after them. They had heard about what had happened the last time 87546 had taken a passenger train, and were not too keen on having him take them out. Soon they were racing along the main line. "Come on, come on, come on!" urged 87546. "He's at it again," groaned the driver. "Any other engine would surely have learned their lesson by now," agreed the fireman before muttering, "He'll be the death of us one day." Bridges and houses flashed by, and soon they were nearly at the yard where Edward was shunting. Meanwhile, Edward had just shunted Annie and Clarabelle into the loop on the down line towards Vicarstown, when Neil, one of the old Sodor and mainland engines, bustled past with a train of ballast trucks. Every wise engine knows that ballast trucks are the most badly behaved, and Neil was clearly having trouble with them. But neither of them could hear the trucks very well when they were approaching, and tried to ignore them when they arrived. But they did hear a lot of impolite name-calling going on between him and the trucks. The ballast train halted next to Edward. "Having trouble, Neil?" asked Edward kindly. "Aye, yon trucks again. I've had enough of their hammers," Neil replied. Eagle pulled in with some empty coal trucks onto the loop next to the signal box, but just as the signalman ran up, "Neil, there's an express due in on your line. You'll have to move onto the other line to make way for it," he said. Edward spoke up. "Please, sir, may I take the train over for Neil? He's having far too much trouble with his trucks, but I can handle them." "Very well, but be quick," replied the signalman. Neil uncoupled and moved forward, and Edward left Annie and Clarabelle. Once Neil had moved into the sidings where the two coaches were, the signalman changed the points so they were set for Gordon to pass by. This meant that all four lines were in use. This was not usually encouraged on a railway, but exceptions had been made, since Gordon, 98462 and 87546 were pulling express trains. Both were running late. Gordon had been delayed due to some maintenance on the line, and the other two had been halted by another signalman, with the fat director standing next to him outside a signal box. He hadn't been too happy to hear that 87546 had lied to everyone, nor that 98462 was pulling passengers when he was forbidden to do so, and had told them to finish their passenger train and leave the railway. The routine was that one engine would be shunted onto one line to make way for a late train to run through, and then, while a third train had been halted, move onto another line once it was clear. This would ensure a clear line for the third train. While it would cause some delays, it was the only safe thing to do in this situation. The trouble was, at that same time, the signalman had gone off duty, and another signalman had taken over. This signalman suffered from short-term memory loss, meaning that he soon forgot about Neil's goods train. So he set the line for all clear for 98462 and 87546, who were tearing along the line. Edward, Eagle, and Neil heard 87546's whistle in the distance. By then, it was much too late. Immediately, Annie, Clarabelle, and the engines went into a panic. The points were set against Edward and the coaches, so they couldn't move, and no one knew that Gordon had been delayed by a last-minute passenger. Eagle was blocked by Edward, who tried to reverse in his right, but the ballast trucks had slipped their brakes on accidentally on purpose. "Push! Push! Push!" they cried to each other, holding the whole train in one place. "No, no!" everyone cried. "There's another train coming through!" The trucks either ignored their cries or decided to keep the train at a standstill because another train was approaching. "Get a move on! Get a move on!" barked 98462 and 87546 to the coaches. The coaches wailed openly. They had a bad feeling that something would happen to them all. Scraping of metal against metal could be heard from miles around, as could an almighty crash. Eagle, Edward, and Neil opened their eyes in just enough time to see what was left of 98462 and 87546's train strewn across Edward's and Gordon's line. They quickly shot them again as Gordon raced through, hit the wreckage and derailed, himself and his coaches scraping Annie and Clarabelle's paint, while the passengers screamed in panic. Worse followed. A faint burning smell could be smelt everywhere, and soon the yard was in a raging inferno. Screams were heard as passengers trapped in the flames tried to escape but failed. Edward slowly opened his eyes and saw 98462's face, pleading in desperation, begging Edward to save him. Edward looked at him sadly and said, "I'm sorry. There's nothing anyone can do." There was nothing else he could say. "It was the worst accident this railway has ever had," Edward concluded gravely. Neil, Eagle, Annie and Clarabelle were just in need of a repaint. Annie and Clarabelle were in so much shock that it took their being given to Thomas when he was awarded his branch line to help them to recover fully. I was so badly damaged I was almost beyond repair, and I was rebuilt to my old design. Gordon was also extremely badly damaged, but not as bad as me, although the fire had burnt our paintwork off. The fire brigade managed to put the fire out, but 246 passengers were hurt. The worst thing was that 226 passengers died in that terrible accident. Over 80 of them were so badly burnt that their bodies were unrecognizable, and most of them had been in the stopping train. It eventually also turned out that the impact had broken the couplings on some of the coaches at the end of the train, and those coaches just rolled in the opposite direction. Thomas took them back to the big station, while another engine helped clear up the mess. But worst of all was the sorry condition of 98462 and 87546, both of whom stood in front of me, beyond repair and dead.